Welcome to this week's episode of On Record PR, where we dive into the topics and strategies that matter most to law firm leaders. I'm Gina Rubel. I'm the CEO and General Counsel of Fury Rubel Communications, and I am joined by immigration attorney and friend Wendy Castor Hess. Hi, Wendy.
Hi, Gina. Thank you so much for the opportunity to spend this time with you today.
Well, I know how busy you have been, so I really have to thank you for joining us today. So, would you tell our audience, our listeners, what firm you're with?
I'm a partner with the immigration law firm of Landau, Hess, Simon, Choi, and Dobley, located in Philadelphia.
Okay. And how about a brief intro, an overview of what you do at the firm?
I'm a partner. We only do immigration. The bulk of our practice is corporate immigration, representing universities, pharma companies, medical institutions, all types of businesses, family-based, but we also have an arm of our firm that does litigation.
So it's an interesting time for all of us. And while we're not going to talk a lot about politics, what I do want to do is talk about what our listeners are asking. And so I'd like to start out with asking you what the state of U.S. immigration policy is regarding travel in and out of the United States for visitors, visa holders, and green card holders, whether they be corporate or not.
And that's such an important question at this point, Gina. And yesterday, I and one of my associates spent the entire day at a university, and we were speaking to faculty, to students, to admin, to members of the community who were ex-graduates of that school. Plus, this is what I've been living and breathing since January 20th. The state of travel into the US is distressing, alarming. Those are probably the better words that I can choose at this particular time. And each one of the categories that you've mentioned has very, very different rules that apply to each. So we'll just divide for a moment into non-immigrant and immigrant. Non-immigrant is a tourist. Non-immigrant is a student. Non-immigrant is a resident physician who is coming to pursue graduate medical training in the US. And a green card holder is somebody who is allowed to be here forever. The non-immigrants are supposed to leave at a certain point. So in each category, there are different things that are happening. We're having extreme vetting. We always had vetting at the border. And border, when I refer to border, I am referring to ports of entry. That means land from Canada, land from Mexico, arriving at an airport where you're met by Customs and Border Protection. And let me be really clear about this. I am a strong believer in strong borders. I am a strong believer in rule of law. I am a strong believer in having people who belong in this country come to this country to work, to visit, to avail themselves of the excellent educational opportunities we have here. For all of those people to come here because that is their reason for coming here. So I believe in border enforcement. Now, my footnote to that, or my caveat to that, is some of the things we're seeing are very worrisome. Example, but correct. Somebody comes to the border to say, I'm coming to visit. Visitors' visas are to visit, not to work. And I'm sure all of the people listening to your podcast and the one which I am now invited to participate in today have heard horror stories about what's happening at the border. Keep in mind, this is not everybody, but sometimes people are coming in, and this was pre-current administration, who are coming in on the incorrect visa. They're coming in with the idea that they're going to work, but they don't have a working visa. Rightfully so, Customs and Border Protection must turn them around and should turn them around. What we're hearing, however, is prior to January 20th, oftentimes when people came into the United States on the wrong visa, on a visiting visa rather than a working visa, they were allowed the opportunity to do something humane. which is to withdraw their application for admission to the US. And they were not detained. Oftentimes, it's a simple misunderstanding of the law. Sometimes it isn't. But it appears that there's been much tougher enforcement of that. And there have been memos circulated through Department of State and under something which is called Protecting the United States from Foreign Terrorists and Other National Security and Public Safety Threats, which is an executive order as of published on January 20th, 2025, which is now stating that individuals who come in should be subjected to much, much more extensive vetting than before. And this is where we're getting our foreign students caught. This is where we're getting our doctors caught. This is where we have most recently in Dearborn, I think it was this past weekend, an attorney who was representing one of the civil rights, I wouldn't use the word civil rights, I will take that back. One of the individuals who was engaging in a protest on a campus in Michigan, who was an F1 student, meaning coming here to study. And that particular US citizen attorney was detained, and their social media apparatus, their laptop, their iPhone were both seized. And when he asked to have everything returned to him, he there was an issue with that, and he basically said, according to what the media has reported, well, I'm just a civil rights attorney. I'm not one of the big guys. I'm not one of these big law firms. And he ultimately got his apparatus back. But that is very chilling to
That is
know.
chilling.
And
That's
I don't know if you had heard of that, but
I hadn't heard about that one. I've heard a lot. And so one thing I don't want to forget to ask you, if you would send me after our call, the link to that particular executive order, I want to make sure I put it in our show notes for our
absolutely.
listeners. And so what I believe as a summary to the answer to the first question is, it really depends on your reason for coming to the US and what kind of visa you're getting. And you do need to, and we're going to get to practical advice at the end. So I don't want to do all that just yet.
For sure.
Yes, I'm keeping you listeners on the line so that you get to hear all the practical stuff at the end. But so what are some of the most common challenges visitors face when traveling to the US? Like what's happening at these points of entry?
Well, what typically happens is when you attempt to leave the airport or when port of entry, you can be detained and put in what's called secondary inspection, deferred inspection. So the normal thing is if you have ESTA or if you are coming in, you stand at the little desk and you say, and the officer from Customs and Border Protection says, what are you here to do? I'm here to visit the Statue of Liberty. I'm here to go to Longwood Gardens. I'm here to do something, or I'm taking my family to Disney World. But if you've been profiled, if for some reason that Customs and Border Protection officer feels that you are not really going to do that, that's when you get your social media search, when you get your electronic devices seized, and when you get questioned. And it's happening more and more. Years and years ago, this used to happen when young women from Ireland were coming over to be au pairs without being on the J1 au pair visa. And what was happening is in those days, the Customs Border Protection, but it was called INS, there wasn't Homeland Security at that point, they would open up the suitcases and find a letter that says, oh, Susie, we can't wait for you to take care of little Johnny. And then they'd say, home you go. Because you are not here to tour the Statue of Liberty. You're here to engage in employment. So now we don't have the open suitcases, even though, of course, we can't. Customs Border Protection has the absolute right to open up suitcases and to search, but we're transferring the electronic or substituting the electronic devices for the way to gather evidence to show that the individual who is seeking entry, and that's a really important point for me to stress. When you come to the United States, whether you're a green card holder and you're coming home to the States, or whether you're a tourist or a foreign student, each and every time you leave this country or seek entry, it's a new entry. And at that point, what you've done in the past can come back to bite you, such as a criminal record.
So are you saying that they don't need a search warrant to go through your computer or your cell phone?
Correct?
Okay.
Well,
So
all right.
that's something that I actually thought in my, I don't do immigration law. I never did. So I thought, oh, well, I'm sure they have to have a search warrant, but they don't.
So I think what I have such a struggle with. I've been a lawyer for many, many years. And I know we have a document called the Constitution. I know we have certain protected rights. But what I'm experiencing, and I don't know the answer to, and hopefully some people listening to this podcast know it better than I, there's a big distinction between what the law is and the reality of what's happening. And I don't know which one is real, but I do know that this is happening.
Well, I think unfortunately that many of us in the legal community feel the same way, as we're not sure as to what's happening or why. With that, I'm going to pause for a message from our sponsor, and we'll come right back.
This episode is brought to you by Furia Rubel Communications, a public relations and marketing agency serving law firms and businesses worldwide. With an expert team positioned throughout the U.S. and supported by an international faculty, Furia Rubel enhances our clients' brands through integrated communications by providing expert guidance in crisis management and high-profile litigation, protecting brand and reputation, and supporting internal marketing teams. To learn more, visit furiarubel.com.
Welcome back, everyone. I'm Gina Rubel, and I'm joined by Wendy Castor Hess, who is talking about immigration law. And, it's a really scary reality right now with what you're dealing with every day with corporations who bring in people with certain expertise into the US to work for them, and all the challenges that they're facing or that universities are facing with students and things like that. So I'm going to ask you, what are the reasons some visitors are being detained entry into the US, and how can those things be overcome or avoided?
Well, as I mentioned before, a big thing is and has always been coming in on the inappropriate visa. Example, I had somebody with a clothing shop, a pop-up shop, and they wanted to come to Miami to do a pop-up. And they were coming from, let me just make up a country, let me say Norway. So they were going to come to the States on a tourist visa with really cool clothing that I know my daughter would have absolutely adored in the pop-up shop. So I was really excited. I said, wow, maybe she'll get to go and take a look at this cool clothing. Well, I said to them, well, what are you planning on doing? Oh, we're going to come in and we're going to sell the clothing. You're not allowed to do that. You're allowed to come to take orders, but you're not allowed to sell. They're all very, very important definitions of what is permissible activities. If you're coming here to work and not to just attend meetings, but to go to different client sites and as an engineer, that's not permissible activity. So you're seeing a lot of that happening. And what used to happen is you'd hop on the plane from another country, you'd do your pop-up shop, you'd sell things, and you'd go back, but not so anymore. But the other thing, which is really what I think you're getting at this particular point, is people who have visas, who are students, who have been students for a long time, and they leave to go home and see their family. An F1 student means you're supposed to go back. You're supposed to have a non-immigrant intent. How do you manifest that? Well, you go home and visit your family during school breaks. As parents, Gina, you and I very much like it when our children come and visit us. So those are foreign students, their parents equally so would like their children to come home during breaks. But now something very new and very alarming is happening. Each and every time that student seeks admission, they're looked at again. And depending on what country they're from, depending on what AI, and the only way we can figure this out is somebody must have unleashed AI. They're being stopped. They're being taken to that secondary inspection, to that deferred inspection, and they're being asked questions. What countries did you go to? Were you in Afghanistan? Were you in Iran? Were you in Iraq? And there's a whole list of countries. Were you in Cuba? What were you doing there? Passports are examined. This was always done, but even more so. And then next, were you involved? But they don't necessarily ask this question. But if you take a look at this, protecting the U.S. from foreign terrorists and other safety threats, it's basically saying the U.S. must, to protect Americans, the U.S. must be vigilant through the visa issuance process and admission. The U.S. must identify them before their admission or entry. Remember, this is an entry into the U.S. And the U.S. must ensure that admitted aliens and aliens otherwise already present in the U.S. do not bear hostile attitudes towards its citizens, culture, government, institutions, or founding principles, and do not advocate for, aid, or support designated foreign terrorists and other threats to our national security. That's a heck of a very large mouthful without very many parameters. So we are seeing increased seizure of electronic equipment, increased questioning at port of entry, and people turned around who the Customs and Border Protection officer believes fall within this executive order. First time I've ever seen this in my life.
I don't want people to be afraid to come to the US. We have great things here. There are many, many, many good people here. I have many friends who work for companies that are based in Canada or Mexico or the UK who work in their US subsidiaries. So what I want to do is give them practical advice for traveling to the US about what they should be doing to avoid some of these issues popping up in the first place. So we have a few minutes left, and I think this is a really good time to give our listeners some tips on things that they can do to safeguard themselves.
All right. Well,
besides calling an immigration attorney.
All right. That was what I was going to start with, Gina.
Well, you can't, because you're not on here to sell. You're on here to give.
I am at this point. I really feel that my job is to protect. My job is to make sure that people who have the absolute right to be here from other countries and who enrich America by their talents are able to come here. So the first thing is, if you're working with a company, make sure that the visa that they're bringing you on, they're working with corporate counsel, immigration counsel there, and that the paperwork is there. When you will have inside your passport, there's a little stamp, unless you're Canadian, and then you don't have a visa stamp inside your passport. Make sure your passport is valid for at least 6 months. Make sure when you enter the United States, you're entering with the appropriate visa and it is valid. I have had clients who didn't realize that when today is April 11th, that they're trying to come in on April 12th, but their visa expired on April 9th. You have to check that. You have to make sure. And if you have a visa for XYZ company to come in and perform computer services, or if you're a physician to work at XYZ hospital pursuant to one of the visas that allows you to work in H-1B, it is company specific. Don't assume. Have all of your original documents, have your educational documents, have the correct visa, and have pay stubs. And also make sure, this is a biggie, that your LinkedIn matches what your attorney or your company, because many times some of my corporate clients or prior to them becoming my corporate immigration clients, they didn't use counsel. So they will say that Mr. So-and-so is a project manager. But on Mr. So-and-so's LinkedIn, they say they are a junior architect. That alone, that discrepancy can be enough for somebody at Customs and Border Protection to say, oh, wait a minute, this is not who you are. So they're looking
Wow.
at social
So if
media.
you're one of those people who don't update your LinkedIn profile and hasn't updated it, you really need to do that if you're planning to travel to the United States and you're a non-citizen.
Right. And the other thing that I saw years ago, but it's popping up now. We have people coming in and their company did not tell them they needed a visa to come here. So on their laptop, they have their contract for the apartment that they've leased in Yardley, Pennsylvania, or somewhere in Rittenhouse Square, Pennsylvania, a 1-year lease. And they also have information on how to transfer their dogs to the United States. But they're coming to the port of entry and they're saying, oh, I'm here to visit for a couple of weeks. No, that does not work. And once again, a search of social media. And then I had one client recently, but very important to even think of now because it's even more extreme vetting, where they put their change to a new employer on their LinkedIn, but they didn't have permission in the US to work for this employer.
Oh boy.
So consistency. And the other thing that I always tell my clients when I go ahead and I prepare documents for them before they go to a consulate to apply for a visa, before they seek entry, read these documents. If they're not correct, tell me, let me amend them. Consistency, consistency, consistency. And don't come to this country to get married tomorrow on a tourist visa. That, even if you don't get caught initially by Customs and Border Protection, that's going to come back to bite you. So to go back to the point that you made, most people are coming in without incident. Those who are having problems are coming in on incorrect visas, or their social media is such that they fall within this January 2025 action and they are being grilled and stopped from reentry. And I have not been a very happy camper as far as my clients are concerned, because they've been asking me the question, should I travel? And the first thing I look at, since they're all on the proper visas, I've checked that, is tell me about your social media. What have you said? And maybe this is a year to visit North Carolina, Charleston, experience all the bounties that the US has to offer.
Wow. So get off social media. Get rid of your
Well, which
account.
would kill your business, but
Right.
that's,
Should they have emergency contacts here in the US?
they absolutely should. And that's a really good point. And thank you for bringing that up, Gina. Back in the olden days, and when I refer to olden days, I refer to prior to January 20th, 2025.
Oh, so you're not
When-
talking about in the letter writing days where a letter would go by ship from Italy to Philadelphia.
No, not that olden day. It was just a wee, what, 80 something days ago. When I would have clients who would have a problem at port of entry, oftentimes they were able to call me, or I was able to reach out to Customs and Border Protection. And I do want to say that, people are people. I have had, for the most part, and maybe I've been very lucky, especially with the people in Philadelphia, the Customs and Border Protection people in Philadelphia have been wonderful. And I do want to put in a plug for this. I know we're talking about having worried about rights and worrying being violated, but you have a lot of good people who are there and they are trying to protect us from terrorism. However, sometimes because of ideology that is now taken over a bit, there's a fine line between protection and overprotection is perhaps the best way that I can say that. So what was your question again, Gina?
So I asked you if they should have emergency contacts, and I think
Yes, so I
you were
used to
about
be able to
say
get,
they could call you. Can they not call you now?
yeah, I don't, most of the time, my big concern is things are happening so quickly. And one, they're not going to be able to reach me. Number two, they might be back on the next plane. And if a plane is not leaving that night, they might be detained and held.
And they can be detained without a phone call?
That's what we're hearing. I'm afraid to say this. I'm not getting what as I say that, but I haven't had any of those. But I will tell you, if I have a moment, what's happening now is a revocation of student visas for tons and tons of foreign students
Seeing that.
and revocation, and they're here and they're being told you have to leave. And if you don't leave, we will do to you that which we did to the Tufts student. We will come and we will get you. And there's a question of, do they litigate? And it's little things. And this is another part. It didn't used to be, if I had a client who was arrested for a traffic accident or arrested for something small, I always said, carry a certified copy of your record of conviction or dismissal. And in Pennsylvania, we have ARD, Accelerated Rehabilitative Disposition, which does not constitute, last I looked, and if I'm wrong, please, I want to be corrected, a conviction. I am terrified to let my ARD clients travel. What is happening to foreign students now, and this just happened to a student who had a ticket for driving without a license 3 years back, is graduating in a couple of months, or should be graduating, and really had her driver's license, but didn't have it with her. So she paid the ticket. She has now been told she has to go home, and her CVIS, which is her F1 student designation, has been revoked, and her license has been revoked. They're tiny, tiny arrests that do not render somebody inadmissible to the United States that are now being used as part of this CVIS termination. So when you come back in, when you seek reentry, you can be shut down and turn around for this reason, for social media, and any type of arrest, not even a conviction. It used to be only a conviction.
Wow. Well, I know we're almost out of time, but I'm going to ask you one question, and if you choose not to answer it, that's fine as well. But is there a particular port of entry that you would tell people not to go to?
You know, so much of this depends on who you get and when you
point.
get them. I know some of my colleagues in Buffalo say, don't use this bridge, use that bridge, but I don't have a big upstate New York practice. And what I would say is standard for every port of entry: tell the truth. I'll repeat that again. Tell the truth. If you're telling the truth, your body language conveys to the Customs and Border Patrol inspector that you have nothing to fear. Of course you're afraid, but tell them you're afraid. Say, what would you want, officer? I'm happy to comply with whatever you want. This is my purpose in coming to the US. I believe in America. I believe in the rule of law, and I want to make sure that I do everything appropriately.
Which reminds me to just say that if the signs in immigration say, do not be on your cell phone, please do not be on your cell phone. I think that's something that too many people take for granted and don't realize that that can be something to pull you right out of line and get you questions. So with that, Wendy, I want to thank you for joining me today. I'm sure our listeners appreciate the information you've shared. And I want to thank you, listeners, for tuning in. We welcome your feedback and questions at podcast@onrecordpr.com. And if you've enjoyed this episode, please consider leaving a review on iTunes. It really does help, and we'll see you next week.
And thank you, Gina.
Thank you, Wendy.
On Record PR is produced by Jennifer Simpson Carr and Matt Henderson, with support from the team at Furia Rubel Communications. This episode is edited by Isabel Horan and Christian Yamula. Visit www.onrecordpr.com for resources and more information.